Hey Mark, how you doing?
Hey, I'm well. I'm well. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me on this. Hey, Christian.
Hey, Mark.
Good,
Yeah.
Hey.
good to see you. Welcome. So let's see. Christian, where are you right now?
I am home in Princeton.
And you are home from where have you been most recently?
I had spent the fall down in Louisiana, working on a farm, taking care of some horses. So I got back early January, and I've been home since. Just had my first day of Zoom classes again, first time since the spring.
So you're starting up school again this semester.
I am, yeah.
And tell us where you're going to school.
I go to Stanford out in California, normally non-COVID circumstances.
Normally. And so why were you down in Louisiana this fall?
I just really didn't feel like doing online classes again. And I know how to, take care of horses. So I figured, why not just get a job and, spend every day not looking at a screen outside in a different part of the country.
All right. And Nikhil, where are you right now?
I'm in just outside of Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
And
So,
what are you doing in Steamboat Springs if you live in California?
yep. So I am also completely remote. So yeah. So I'm just taking my calls and doing my work in my girlfriend's grandparents' house. We're house sitting for them as they escape the winter in Arizona. So I've never gone skiing before, but it's gonna be my first time. Hopefully Saturday. It was -9 degrees this morning, and so yeah, I mean that's something that I haven't really had too much experience with, but it's pretty cool. So I work for a company called Cisco Systems, and so I work specifically on as a software engineer on a product that basically helps people manage their like large networks. So like networks in a mall or in a college campus. Yeah, so I basically code all day using like AI and machine learning to find issues before they might happen.
And how would you say the machines are learning?
They're uh they're getting data. Yeah, people in my team are really smart, and it's a little bit uh it's very humbling to be around people like that, but it's a lot of fun.
And tell us where you went to school and what you studied.
So I went to Duke in North Carolina, and I studied computer science, and so that's why I'm a software engineer. And did a I did a minor in math and religious studies, so just kind of stuck mostly to like technical stuff in college and
And so
college.
have you landed the dream job that you hoped you'd get in college?
I would say so. I would say that I'm really lucky because I can't imagine myself doing anything more up my interest alley. Like I just have a lot of fun. Maybe I'm not working for a networking company for the rest of my life, but I'm extremely lucky to be in a team that has like so much engineering talent that I can learn from them.
And do I remember right? You graduated in 2019?
Yep. So
And
yeah, so
Christian,
it's
that's
been my first full year. Yeah.
the same year you graduated high school.
Yep.
So this has kind of been a crazy first year for both of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What have you been studying so far, and what seems kind of interest at Stanford?
So I'm actually a declared classics major. So I focus a lot on kind of particularly like ancient Greek philosophy and political theory. I'd say that's kind of my favorite stuff. But I'm trying to get the classical broad education.
Christian, why study classics at Stanford and Silicon Valley when tech and the future is just what's flowing out of this place? Why regress and go to the past?
Well, I would say, I think first I would kind of push back on the idea that it's a regression. I think it's not like I'm immune to the changes happening in the world around me. I would say, even though I'm a classics major, I'm perfectly able to study some CS and some even tougher science courses, but obviously not to the depth of a CS major. But I would say there's a real grounding in at least talking about, and as well as thinking about, the just the kind of underlying big questions about society and individuals. I think it's easy to kind of focus on just a professional career, but I think it's so important to also have any thoughts about what you're really going to be doing with your future grounded in some sense of your role in society.
Are there some favorite big questions that you
Mm.
gravitate towards or that were opened up for you this past year?
I think the one that really pulled me into classics was I took a class on Antigone, and so the real central question of that class was, when is it acceptable to break the law, if you find an unjust law? And I mean, I think this is something we still wrestle with today. Different schools of thought on the law would have different answers, but I just think those kinds of questions about, what are you willing to break the law for? And more importantly, what are you really willing to not just break the law, but suffer the consequences of breaking the law for?
Nikhil, you said you studied computer science, and you also had a religion minor. How did that religion minor work itself in?
Yeah, I think I really just wanted to do something outside of math and computer science. I mean, I I really enjoyed studying religious texts and scripture in like in the context of different religions. So studying Islam um, and Hinduism and and Jewish studies and also Christian texts. So there's a lot of history there, and Duke has a really great religious studies department. So I felt like I was really lucky to be in a place where they were asking a lot of questions, and listening to the way that they asked questions was always was sort of a method that expanded way beyond just the purview of religious studies. So when you're talking about sources, when you're talking about history, and so I was really lucky to have professors who would really challenge us to think about those things, and I think that was really important to my like college education as a whole.
Now that you have a dream job coding full time, are those questions still with you, or is that just history?
I feel like those questions always stay with you, and while it might be like the dream job out of college, I don't I don't know if it's like my forever job, whether like whether being a software engineer is like my future forever. It's just something that I really enjoy doing right now, and it's something that I enjoy, and I think that like just uses my talents right now. But I feel like I I'm not I haven't fully developed a person, and so challenging myself within something that I feel like my talents are being utilized is is extremely helpful in that sort of journey and search.
Christian, down in New Orleans, taking care of horses, you also did a lot of reading, right?
A good amount.
What were some of the things that you read? Why'd you read them? What's staying with you?
Well, I started with Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, which very highly recommend, particularly if you're interested in kind of some bigger theological questions, and particularly if you're going to go down to the South. Yeah, that was recommended to me by Steve Longley, and I think that was definitely just really interesting to have a lot of time to myself to be able to think about the kind of questions the book raised. I also read a book called American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser, another really interesting book, I would say, particularly for kind of young people who perhaps are feeling the kind of pressures of, I can't think of a better way to describe it besides like pressures to kind of go out and, find that American dream and kind of and build their life somewhere, both career wise, but also, with the family. I just thought that was just a really interesting book to read as a, 19-year-old thinking about what I want to do and how I want to live.
Why are you thinking about those questions?
Well, I think, perhaps this goes back to, being a classics major. There's not exactly one clear-cut job for me. So, and I think there's a blessing and a curse in that the breadth of some of a more kind of fuzzy humanities major is you can do a lot with it. Though obviously a little bit tougher to get a job as an engineer, doing software. But at the same time, the curse of that is that you don't feel like you necessarily have a clear default option. Not that, computer science majors only are limited to computer science options, but you definitely have a clear, if nothing else, idea versus classics. I mean, I guess you could say be a Greek or Latin teacher at a high school, but otherwise, you've got more of a blank canvas, I feel like. So I think it's natural to think about, not just what do I want to be doing, but where do I want to be doing it? Do I want kind of work to be some kind of means to an end, to some kind of life, or do I want the work in itself to be the end, to be, I guess, almost an identity?
What were some of the highlights of college? What were some of the joys that you found in college?
Well, I talked about a little bit about religious studies, being able to take religious studies as a as a computer science major. Just the experience of being in a team in college. So I was on the track and cross country team, and just being with those guys and girls, and we those are definitely inseparable bonds. And we sort of, I don't know, there's always there's a certain bond that you get with someone that you suffer with. So doing hundreds of miles in the deep forest with someone, you get really close to them, and you become I don't know, you reach a place of vulnerability with them that you probably wouldn't with anybody else. So yeah, I think those were probably the best parts of my college experience.
Christian, your first year was kind of a weird one, but what were some of the highlights of being at Stanford and being on campus?
I similarly to Nikhil, I think I found some fantastic communities. I would say, my youth group on campus is fantastic, and we, I think one of my favorite memories will be we were at our kind of weekly Tuesday night meetings, and my youth pastor and a bunch of the guys and I were just hanging out after, and somebody said, "Why don't we just wake up in 6 hours and drive to Tahoe and go skiing?" And I thought, well, I've got class. I can't do that. And he was like, "Oh, come on." And it was one of the best decisions I ever made to skip class. I think that was my first time ever skiing out west, and just a super cool experience. And I think that spontaneity, or I discovered I was mentioning before working with horses, but I actually play on the polo team out at Stanford. And that's just been a fantastic community of getting off campus, just taking a horse out with, those buddies, out in the gorgeous California wilderness, riding on the beach, stuff like that, those kinds of experiences are pretty tough to forget.
Having been down in the South and New Orleans, and having been out in Stanford, and then Nikhil also having been down at Duke and now in Silicon Valley, what are some of the things that you see those communities valuing?
I'd say for myself, what I just noticed in the South, something I really came to appreciate, and I was in a fairly rural part of the South, but I would say the kind of self-reliance that, oh, pipe's busted, let's fix it. Oh, fence is down, let's fix it. As opposed to in New Jersey, or at least in my household, is a reliance on that. Oh, we gotta call the, I know we've been out of it with our dishwasher's been out for 2 weeks now, and we've been wrestling to get a plumber here. And I don't know why, but that just seems very quintessentially Princetonian, as opposed to in Louisiana, where my boss and I just, whenever there was a problem on the farm, he had like a whole armory of tools and saws and stuff, and we were just kind of jerry-rigging stuff to fix it.
I was in completely different regions of the world or the country, so being in North Carolina, you're sort of in the South, but everybody that goes to Duke is from the Northeast for the most part. North Carolina was sort of a really interesting place to go to school, and I definitely enjoyed the food, the barbecue there, and I enjoyed the friendliness, I think, especially like when you like got off Duke's campus, just everyone like would say hi to you when you're running. Like in Silicon Valley, it's similar in many ways to Princeton. Like people are a little bit more focused ahead on what like they're doing. There's a very strong like work culture there, so people just live and breathe work there. People are outside a lot more, so you can like the parks are always packed, and all these people who are working hard during the week are literally out all day in the weekend and things like that. So yeah, they're very different parts of the country.
But are there things from Nassau that have stayed with either of you guys?
I think for me, the importance of having a community of people you can just totally let loose with, but at the same time, people who, while you're totally letting loose, you can be vulnerable and talk about those deeper questions with. It was why I knew right when I got out to campus, I was hunting for a youth group like we had back at Nassau, because I just knew that if I didn't find an hour every 2 hours every week to kind of nurture that part of me, it'd just get totally eclipsed in the I think well, it's probably both college craziness, but Nikhil, you'd probably agree also just the Bay Area, all over the place craziness.
Yeah, I'd say I completely agree with Christian. I mean that finding community and people that you can be vulnerable with and also have a really good time with, and being willing to ask really hard questions within those groups. Like, some people don't. It's hard to ask somebody certain like questions about their faith or about what they believe, what their morals are, what like how do they approach the world, or their ethics. Like, I think those questions are really hard to ask in a normal setting, and so how do you create that vulnerability? How do you do that? And I think that that's something that we learned, especially in youth group. And so I think that's a lesson that I have been able to keep with me.
Did you find groups at
And
Duke that were good community to you?
yeah, I mean, I found some groups. I think within my team, again, when you're logging a lot of miles and you're just sort of spending hours with someone, you can't really spend that time in silence. It gets a little unbearable. So you usually run out of things to talk about that are small talk, and you start. And when when your body's hurting, sometimes you need to talk about something else that's a little deeper. So yeah, I think we had a lot of like really interesting discussions together, and um, I had a really diverse set of people on my team, from all over the country. So just talking with them was was fun. It was frustrating at times, and but at the same time it was like really fulfilling. So I definitely would not trade that for anything else.
And now that you've graduated and out in the working world, that brings some big challenges and trying to find community, especially during a coronavirus work remote year. What's
Yeah,
that like?
it's definitely really weird being um, in this world, in what the real world is today, because when I started in when I started my job in last October, um, I mean, everything was open and we were doing stuff. You could go places, and so I started to like reach out and try and find like a church that I liked or something like that. Was really challenging to sort of put my pretty introverted self out there, and sort of churches and go alone, and yeah, but it was also it ended up being um, an even more difficult experience because I wasn't really able to find any communities. Um, I did find some that I, you know, would sort of engage in, and then there would be certain like red flags that might appear that would be like, I don't know if I can really continue being a part of this community because I don't necessarily agree with how you look at certain moral problems and stuff, and especially when especially in Silicon Valley, where the majority of churches that I've found um, tend to lean a lot more conservative, and coming from the like the the faith that I sort of developed at Nassau and at Duke, it was a little hard to talk about some of the questions that we brought up, and being sort of like a lone thinker in certain discussions was sometimes difficult. Is
I mean, it's been a rough week. We've had an assault, an insurrection, an attack, an invasion on the US Capitol, joint session, during constitutional business, during election business. Do you have hope for our country?
yeah, I mean, I think that hope has been challenged this year, but I think I don't know. I mean, I definitely it was an interesting time. Uh, like listening to all that news happen live. I had like a YouTube live broadcast going while I was driving through parts of this country where there were large political signs up, and very sometimes vulgar political signs up. So like I think one interesting experience I've had this last year is just driving through the entire country. So I drove from California to New Jersey. We went through basically through almost the entire lateral part of the country, and then I drove from New Jersey to Colorado, and that was many of the same states in many different states. So just seeing all those different places at this time was sort of scary. It was again frustrating, but at the same time, I don't know, just sometimes we get, especially in a place like Princeton or a bubble at Duke or a bubble at in the area, there's not really a lot of faces you can put to ideas. And I think that those ideas become monoliths of I don't know, some sort of evil monoliths in our head. And I think sometimes putting faces to those has been sort of humbling in that experience.
Christian, you also just drove home from Louisiana, and you were talking about kind of the power of that experience. Why is just driving on a road so powerful?
Like you pay attention so much more to the landscape you're passing, right? You can actually feel the distance, as opposed to flying where you can't really see, as Nikhil was saying, the individual yard signs and billboards. Yeah, I did two kind of driving home. I first drove up to Chicago, and so I got a lateral view going through kind of Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee. And then I did Chicago home through Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. So definitely. Yeah, I think, everybody, not heard it, but there's a lot of different ways to drive. I think some people like podcasts and audiobooks. I can't really get into those. So for me, I do just spend a lot more time kind of, letting my eyes wander around and thinking and listening to some tunes that thank you for sending me those albums, Mark. Got me through long parts of those drives.
And do you have hope for our country?
Absolutely. I think the political temperature is obviously very high right now. I think, for the last 4 years, we've had very divisive leadership. Some, including myself, would argue intentionally divisive leadership. And I think at the end of the day, when you don't have that coming from the top anymore, I do think the political temperature will lower a bit. I do think at the end of the day, Americans still agree on far more than they disagree. I would say I just spent 3 months living in the deep South where, my boss and every friend I made down there came from different political backgrounds from myself. And, they were still among the most fine, loving, and generous people I've met. And, I do think at the end of the day, it's almost similarly to, the question of what is the role of a Christian with a sinner. And I would answer that it's just to love them. And obviously there's different ways to love them and not necessarily enabling the sinner, but at the same time, you've got to love them. And I think, if you want to, by extension, say, holding political views that you might find distasteful or damaging is sinful, what is your role? It's still to love them, and still to kind of find that common humanity. And I think as a country, we've always been able to do that. And, it'll take some time, but I do anticipate the political temperature lowering and people remembering that.
Nikhil, what overcomes differences and brings people together?
I think, I don't know. I mean, authentic conversation has always been the thing that I found has overcome differences, especially with my friends, because I have several friends who I strongly disagree with many of their um, political views and um, views on religion and views on different things. And sometimes you can't have that authentic conversation without straying away from that topic. So, having food and getting ice cream together and talking about sports and talking about other things, just not talking about politics and not talking about what your religious stance on gender roles is, because sometimes the moment you go into that territory, it just causes such a strong friction between you that you can't even talk about anything else. And so I think those sort of just authentic conversations that stem out of enjoying parts of being human together that aren't just what our ethical and moral understandings of the world are sort of what's going to brings us together and will bring us together.
I guess, that makes me think, I think that's very, very true in that I really liked what you said, that authentic conversations. Because I think especially, I think the bigger, what you made me think is that the issue isn't so much we talk politics, but that we talk politics very poorly. And by that, I mean, I've just noticed among my own friends in college, I think we are very guilty, everybody is, of making assumptions about the kind of underlying intention of somebody's views or what somebody must believe because they believe X. And so, I think I would say in having kind of those authentic conversations, I've been able in certain ways to kind of understand somebody's more underlying value that might explain a view they have, but might do so in a way that makes me realize that view they have isn't from a place of malintent or, hatred for anybody. It's just coming from a very different value than I have, such as self-reliance, individualism or something. And so I think when you were talking about those authentic conversations, I was very much thinking kind of those conversations that are deep, and can, talk about fundamental beliefs, but at the same time aren't just going kind of shallowly onto, some political question, like what's your stance on guns? you know.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we really have to find like grace in our conversations with others. And I think it's hard for us to approach, as like the humans that we are, to approach conversations directly without that with that grace when we haven't established a relationship outside of those tough conversations. So
Well, you guys, this has been fun, and we're proud of both of you, and we hope that the big questions both stay with you and that you also find some route forward on them for your own sake and for the rest of our sakes as well. And we want you to know that Nassau remains a home to you, even if you're not here, and so we're grateful to have had that history with you and been down to Appalachia and been in the mountains of British Columbia and on the roads of the Camino, and so yeah, we're proud of you and good job, and it's fun to catch up and hear where you guys are at and what you're thinking, and we hope to do it again and keep tabs on where you guys are going and what's happening with your lives. So many thanks.
Thank you, Mark and Nikhil. Good to see you both.
Hey, well, let me pray for you guys, all right? Lord, we thank you for Christian and Nikhil, and thank you for this conversation, and we ask your blessing on them and their lives and the journey that they are on, and may you guide them to the questions that are worth asking and through those questions. And may you bring community into their lives, and may they be community to others. And we thank you for their hopeful and humane vision for our country. And we are hopeful that they both would be just key people in our country moving forward, and being a more hospitable and a more perfect union. And so we thank you for them and the chance that we've had to live life with them. And we ask your blessings on them. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to run have dinner because I am hungry. But
good.
Yeah, just great seeing you both.
Get out of here.
Talk to
Bye.
you guys.